Let me make this clear. I'm not afraid of abandoned houses, but I know better now. Fear isn't always irrational. Sometimes, it's the only thing keeping you alive. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. If you've ever felt drawn to an empty house, thought about stepping inside one, or maybe even squatting in one to escape life's hardships, don't. Because not every house is truly abandoned, and once you step in, you might never step out. A few years ago, I was homeless, but by choice. I wasn't running from debt or a bad past. I just wanted freedom. Life on the streets was oddly simple.
I joggelt af intersektions for tips.
It sounds bizarre, but a couple of hours in front of a red light was enough to keep me fed. I didn't have rent to pay, no boss to answer to, no schedules to keep. I was free to do what I wanted, and for a while I loved it. But even a free spirit needs a safe place to sleep, and that was always the challenge. Park benches and cardboard shelters could only get you so far. That's when I started toying with the idea of squatting in abandoned houses. Plenty of people do it, and in my state, the laws offer some degree of protection for squatters. With that in mind, I headed to the hardware store, armed myself with a chain, a padlock, and a few basic supplies, and set out to find a place I could call home, at least for a while. That's how I ended up at 3494 Lucky Fern Road. It was exactly what I was looking for. The house stood alone at the end of a quiet, overgrown street. The porch sagged under its own weight, paint peeled in long, curling strips, and the windows were caked with grime. Perfect. When I tried the front door, it opened easily. No resistance, no sign of recent use. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too tired to care. Inside, it was dark and quiet. Dust coated every surface. The air was stale, but there were no signs of squatters, rodents, or anything else. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I made my way to the kitchen first, curious if anything had been left behind. When I opened the refrigerator, an overwhelming stench hit me like a brick wall. The inside was smeared with mold, and what looked like a decayed mass of meat sat festering on a tray. I gagged, slamming the door shut, and stumbled back to collect myself. Disgusting, but reassuring. It confirmed what I'd suspected. This house had been abandoned for years. Upstairs, I found a bedroom with nothing but a dusty dresser. I stashed my belongings in one of its drawers, relieved to finally have a place of my own, no matter how temporary. But securing the house was a priority. The front door had a functioning bolt, but the back door was wide open without even a basic lock. Strange, but not insurmountable. I looped the chain I'd bought through the door handles and snapped the padlock shut. Problem solved. That's when it happened, the first warning I ignored. The doorknob was hot. Not warm, hot enough to make me yank my hand back instinctively. Confused, I touched it again. This time it was cold. Normal. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe my nerves were acting up, or maybe I was just exhausted. Either way, I locked myself in the bedroom, curled up on the floor, and fell asleep. I woke up sweating. The room was unbearably hot, the kind of heat that makes it hard to breathe. October nights aren't supposed to feel like that, especially not in my part of the country. I stumbled to the window, hoping to let in some air, and froze. Outside, the world wasn't the same. The houses on the street were ruins. Walls had crumbled, roofs caved in, and charred wood littered the ground. The sky was a dull, oppressive gray, not overcast, just dead. There was no sun, no clouds, and worst of all, no sound. I turned back to the room, panic settling in. Everything felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of doom, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. Something unseen watching, waiting. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They started faint, somewhere in the distance, but grew louder with every passing second. Someone, or something, was running down the hallway outside my door. The doorknob rattled violently, and I froze. My heart thundered in my chest as whoever was on the other side began slamming against the door. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, forceful, as if they were determined to break in. With trembling hands, I grabbed the chain and padlock I'd prepared earlier and secured the door. The banging stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. And then I heard it, a low, mournful siren. The siren was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't an emergency alarm or a police siren. It was something alien, a metallic wail that rose and fell, echoing endlessly, filling the air with dread. Through the window, I saw movement. A man stumbled out of one of the ruined houses across the street, clutching a baseball bat. His eyes were wide, wild, as if he'd seen something he couldn't comprehend. Then he dropped the bat. He fell to his knees, screamed, and pressed his hands to his face. Before I could react, he drove his thumbs into his eyes. Blood poured down his cheeks as he collapsed, sobbing and screaming. I wanted to help, to do something, but instinct held me back. I ducked beneath the window, hiding as the siren continued to wail. That's when I heard the second sound, a wet, slithering noise. Something was moving through the street, something enormous. The light outside dimmed. Through the crack beneath the door, I saw the red glow of the sky fade to black as a massive shadow passed by. I didn't look, couldn't. Whatever it was too large, too alien to comprehend. The air itself seemed to bend around it, warping reality. I knew, deep in my gut, that if I looked, I wouldn't survive. For hours or maybe days, I stayed curled up in that room, barely breathing. The siren came and went, and every time it did, I heard the slithering. I never saw what cast the shadow, but I felt its presence. It was hunting, searching for something or someone. Eventually, the light changed. I didn't notice at first, but when I finally dared to open my eyes, the red hue of the sky was gone, replaced by the soft blue of a normal day. The houses outside were intact, the streets bustling with people. I ran. I didn't pack my things, didn't look back. I just ran. Years later, I understand what happened. That house wasn't abandoned, not really. It was a trap. They're everywhere, these so-called abandoned houses. They lure you in with the promise of shelter, but once you step inside, they become something else entirely. You can't spot them by sight. They don't look different from any other empty home. The only warning you'll get is a feeling, a gut instinct telling you to stay away. Trust that instinct. Don't ignore it like I did, because the next time you step into one of these traps, you might not be as lucky. I shouldn't be alive to write this. My name is Ethan Miller, and I'm sharing this because someone else needs to know. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but keeping it inside, it's like poison. I've barely slept since that night on Route 49. I'm not proud of the way I fled, leaving my car, my belongings, my sense of logic. I don't care. I got out, and that's all that matters. After my breakup, I needed to escape. I thought a solo road trip across the Southwest, big skies, empty highways, and a little time to think, might clear my head. For the first 2 days, it worked. But everything changed when I took Route 49. That highway doesn't show up on most maps. I'd pulled into a dusty gas station in northern New Mexico when a guy at the counter said, "Route 49's quicker if you're heading west." I should have noticed his hesitation, the way his eyes darted to the window, like he was checking for something. But I was tired and didn't think twice. The first night on Route 49, the desert stretched endless, bathed in a pale, silver moonlight. It was beautiful and unnerving all at once. Miles passed without a single car. Just me, the road, and the whisper of the wind through cracked windows. Then, around midnight, I saw it. A figure on the side of the road. It stood motionless, barely illuminated by my headlights. A tall, thin man in a dusty coat, his face turned away. At first, I thought he was a hitchhiker, but as my car passed, his head turned, and his eyes, they were hollow, empty sockets that followed my car, unblinking. I pressed the gas harder, the tires kicking up gravel. "It's nothing," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "Just a trick of the light." But even after I'd driven miles beyond him, my chest felt tight, like something was watching me. The next day, I tried to shake off the encounter. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just overtired. By mid-afternoon, The road ahead narrowed, winding through jagged red rock formations. The sky was heavy, clouds hanging low like they wanted to swallow the earth. Then I heard it. Footsteps. It started faint, just a rhythmic tap tap tap, barely audible over the sound of my tires. First, I thought it was my imagination, maybe something rattling in the trunk. But when I slowed the car, the footsteps slowed, too. My throat tightened. What the hell? I muttered, rolling the window down. The desert was still, too still. Hello? My voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No reply, just the footsteps. I slammed the window shut and floored the gas. By nightfall, I reached a lonely gas station, more a shack than anything else, with a single flickering light above the pumps. The attendant, an older man with sun-leathered skin, looked up from a newspaper as I walked in. "Evening," he said, his voice gravelly. "Yeah, just need gas," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. He squinted at me. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, then decided to ask, "Do you know anything about Route 49? Strange stuff happening out there?" The man froze, his expression darkening. "You saw him, didn't you?" My stomach dropped. "Saw who?" "The Watcher," he said quietly, leaning closer. "You weren't supposed to stop on that road. You didn't stop, did you?" I swallowed hard. "No, but he's following me." The man grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "You can't outrun him. You can't fight him. Once he sees you," he trailed off, shaking his head, "you need to leave. Now." That night, the motel I found was a shack barely clinging to life, its sign buzzing faintly in the desert wind. I bolted the door and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the groan of the wind, and then top, top, top. I froze. The sound wasn't outside. It was inside. The tapping grew louder, moving closer. My breath hitched as I grabbed the motel phone, fingers trembling. "Front desk," a sleepy voice answered. "There's someone in my room," I whispered. "What?" "Sir, I don't." The call cut out. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. He was there, standing at the foot of the bed, his face pale and stretched, like it barely fit over his skull. His hollow eyes seemed to drink in the darkness, and his mouth, God, his mouth, twisted into a grin too wide, too sharp. "Why are you running, Ethan?" The voice wasn't human. It was layered, like 100 whispers speaking in unison. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember starting the car. I just remember driving, the headlights slicing through the dark as the figure appeared again and again, on the side of the road, in the rearview mirror always closer. When I finally reached the edge of the highway, the morning sun breaking over the horizon, I slammed on the brakes. He was standing in the middle of the road, waiting. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then he smiled again. Now, as I sit in a dingy apartment back in Portland, I keep replaying that night. The way his grin lingered in my mind. The way his hollow eyes seemed to follow me even after I fled. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city is silent, I hear it, tap, 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 and a whisper that chills me to the bone. "Ethan." In the heart of the Midwest lies a small, forgotten town surrounded by endless cornfields. It's the kind of place that feels like a relic of another time, where life is simple, traditions are sacred, and some secrets are better left buried. But this town has a rule: never enter the fields after sundown, not unless you want to meet what waits for you in the stalks. When I was a kid, the stories about the fields seemed like harmless campfire tales. Parents told them to keep kids from getting lost, or so I thought. They spoke of the Reaper, a figure that wandered the cornfields at night, its face obscured by a burlap sack and its body draped in rotting cloth. They said it hunted anyone foolish enough to wander into its territory after dark. To me, it was just folklore until I saw it for myself. I grew up in Crestfall, a tiny, isolated town with a population of maybe 300 people on a good year. Everyone knew each other and everyone knew the rules. We celebrated the Harvest Festival every October with bonfires, parades, and corn mazes. But the festival came with warnings. Never go into the fields alone, and never after sunset. The elders called it the harvest curse. They claimed the fields were sacred, cursed by an ancient ritual gone wrong generations ago. A sacrifice was supposed to ensure the town's prosperity, but something had gone horribly wrong. Instead of blessings, the fields became a prison for something unnatural. Of course, being young and dumb, I thought it was all nonsense. Until the night I broke the rule. Started with a dare. My best friend Kyle was always the adventurous one. "Let's see what all the fuss is about," he said, grinning as he held up his flashlight. "Come on, Rachel. It's just a cornfield." We'd been drinking a little, not enough to be out of control, but enough to feel invincible. The Harvest Festival was in full swing, and the town square was alive with laughter and music. The fields, on the other hand, were silent, blooming just beyond the glow of the streetlights. "I don't know," I hesitated, staring at the rows of corn that seemed to stretch into eternity. "What's the worst that could happen?" Kyle teased, nudging me. Looking back, I wish I had listened to the small voice in my head screaming at me to stay put. But I didn't. The moment we stepped into the cornfield, the air felt different. Heavier, colder. The stalks were taller than I remembered, swaying gently even though there was no wind. Kyle laughed, waving his flashlight around as he called out, "Hello, Reaper? You out here?" "Stop it!" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. Something about the place made my skin crawl. The further we went, the quieter it got. The music and laughter from the festival faded until all I could hear was the crunch of dry corn husks beneath our feet. And then we heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Get out!" Kyle stopped, his flashlight beam jerking toward the sound. "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the whisper turned into a guttural growl that seemed to echo all around us. The corn rustled violently, as if something huge was moving through it. "We should go," I said, my voice trembling. Kyle nodded, but before we could turn back, the stalks parted, and we saw it. It stood about 10 feet away, its outline barely visible in the dim glow of Kyle's flashlight. Its body was twisted, almost skeletal, draped in ragged cloth that looked like it had been rotting for centuries. The burlap sack over its head was frayed, with empty black holes where its eyes should have been. And then it moved, not like a person, but like a broken marionette, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it took a step forward. "Kyle?" I whispered, but he was frozen, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The Reaper tilted its head, its movements sharp and unnatural, as if it were studying us. Then it raised one gnarled, claw-like hand and pointed at Kyle. "Run," I hissed, grabbing his arm and yanking him back. We bolted through the field, the stalks slapping against our faces as we ran. Behind us, the sound of snapping corn and heavy footsteps grew louder. I dared a glance over my shoulder and instantly regretted it. The Reaper was chasing us, its long arms reaching out as its body jerked and twitched unnaturally. "Faster!" I screamed, adrenaline surging through my veins. We burst out of the field and into the edge of town, collapsing onto the pavement. The lights of the festival were still shining, but the noise felt distant, muffled. An old woman was sitting on a bench nearby, her face pale and lined with years of worry. She looked at us with a mixture of pity and fear. "You went into the fields, didn't you?" she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She sighed, shaking her head. "You've angered it. It doesn't like to be disturbed." "What is it?" Kyle asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. "A long time ago, the town needed a good harvest. A man was sacrificed to the fields, but his soul didn't rest. It became twisted. Now it guards the land, hungry for those foolish enough to enter after dark. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its hollow gaze staring back at me. At 3 a.m., I heard it, a soft, rasping whisper outside my bedroom window. "Get out!" I didn't dare look. The next morning, Kyle was gone. His parents said he never came home. The town organized a search party, but they found nothing, just his flashlight lying broken in the cornfield. I never went back to the fields after that, but sometimes late at night, I hear the whispers again, and I know it's still out there waiting. Would you dare walk the fields? Let me know in the comments. And remember, some rules are meant to be followed, no matter how foolish they seem.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.